History once lived in the air itself, carried on scented threads and sung melodies. Long before books became common, medieval societies preserved their entire past without a single drop of ink. They mastered the art of inkless storytelling, weaving memories into perfumed scarves and epic songs. By the end of this journey, you will understand 10 specific methods that made this sensory history so powerful and enduring. How could a simple fragrance recall a fallen empire? And how did a melody safeguard a legal code for centuries? What does our own digital age, so focused on the visual, lose when we forget the other senses? This exploration reveals a forgotten dimension of the past, where history was not read but experienced. Are you ready to discover how the past was truly felt? The human voice was the original archive, a living library spoken and sung into existence. In a world without books, history belonged to the storytellers. Celtic bards could recite genealogies spanning generations, while West African griots held the entire legal and historical record of their people in memory. These individuals were far more than entertainers. They were the guardians of law, the keepers of lineage, and the teachers of cultural values. Their minds were vast, meticulously organized repositories. To manage this immense load of information, they used powerful mental tools. Rhythmic patterns and repetitive melodic structures acted as a filing system for the mind, turning complex histories into unforgettable songs. Think of the epic of Beowulf, a story of monsters and heroes that lived and breathed in the halls of Scandinavia for centuries, passed from one voice to another long before it was ever written down. This sonic foundation, this world of performed history, created a culture deeply attuned to memory. It was from this rich soil that other, even more subtle, forms of record-keeping would grow. But the voice was not the only keeper of secrets. Alongside the epic tales sung in great halls ran another, quieter stream of memory. It was woven into the very clothes people wore. In the medieval world, textiles were a language of their own, with scarves serving as portable, personal canvases for identity and narrative. Woven from luxurious silks, fine linens, or warm wools, a scarf was never just an accessory. It was a biographical object, a walking archive of a person's life. The colors chosen were never random. A deep indigo might speak of a connection to the sea, while a specific shade of red could only be worn by those of royal blood. The patterns were a map of belonging, with intricate geometric shapes revealing one's tribe and ancestral homeland. Even the weaving technique itself was a signature, a skill passed from mother to daughter for generations. A complex knot, tied in a particular way, could represent a sealed pact or a marriage vow. Delicate embroidery might depict a significant battle a great-grandfather fought in, or a mythical creature like a griffin that was central to a family's origin story. These were not just decorations, they were tactile histories touched and worn every single day. The past was not locked away in a chest. It was draped over a shoulder, feeling the sun and the wind, making history a tangible part of daily existence. The scarf was a silent chronicle, a story waiting to be read by those who understood its visual language. And for those in the know, this language was about to become even more powerful, because the most important messages were not seen at all. They were smelled, and then there was the power of smell, an invisible ink that could write stories directly onto the brain. The creation of these scents was a true alchemy, a practice where perfumers and apothecaries acted as master chemists of memory. They worked with a vast palette of natural ingredients, each harvested for its unique symbolic power. Rosemary was not just a herb, it was the plant of remembrance believed to strengthen the mind. Lavender signified purity and peace, while myrrh, a precious resin, carried the weight of sanctity and ritual. The process of creating a signature scent was a meticulous craft. Petals, roots, and spices were steeped in oils, their essences slowly coaxed out over days or even weeks to form a concentrated perfume. When this bespoke blend was then carefully infused into a linen or silk scarf, it transformed the textile into something far greater than a visual record. It became a memory potion worn around the neck. The science behind this is profound, though medieval people understood it as magic. When you smell that specific, complex fragrance, it bypasses the brain's main processing centers and travels directly to the limbic system. This is the ancient core of your brain, the seat of emotion and long-term memory. A single, unexpected whiff of that scarf could act as a key, instantly unlocking a whole scene from the past with startling clarity. It was not just a reminder of an event, it was a full-body recollection. The scent of a particular floral blend might instantly bring back the chill of a morning air and the sound of a specific oath being sworn during a treaty signing. The aroma of sandalwood and cloves could transport a merchant back to the bustling, spice-filled docks of a faraway port, reliving a moment of great personal risk and reward. This was olfactory coding, a sophisticated language where history was not told but triggered, felt in the gut as much as it was understood by the mind. The perfume was the password, and the scarf was the device that carried it, ensuring the most vital memories remained vivid and emotionally charged across a lifetime. This first method turned the scarf into a scent-imbued chronicle. A community's designated historian, often an elder, would collaborate with a skilled perfumer to compose a fragrance that was a literal map of memory. They were not creating a pleasant aroma for its own sake. They were encoding an entire history into a unique, complex perfume. Every ingredient was a chosen word in this olfactory story. The scent of oak moss, pine, and damp earth might not just smell like a forest. It was the specific forest where the village was founded, capturing the very essence of that primordial moment. A subtle hint of sea salt and ambergris was not a general oceanic smell. It was the scent of a particular ancestor's perilous voyage across the ocean, a smell that recalled salt spray on the face and the creaking of a wooden ship. This bespoke blend was then meticulously infused into the fibers of a special scarf, transforming it from a simple textile into a concentrated, wearable archive. The true magic happened during the storytelling session. The narrator, often the keeper of the scarf, would drape it around their shoulders or hold it close. As they began to speak, they would periodically inhale its scent. This was not a random gesture. That specific fragrance acted as a powerful mental cue, a structured prompt that guided the narrative. The initial notes of pine might trigger the beginning of the creation myth. As the story progressed to the Great Migration, the deeper scent of ambergris would rise, ensuring the tale of the ocean crossing was recounted with perfect accuracy. It was a sophisticated mnemonic device, using scent to walk through the story step by step, guaranteeing no crucial detail was ever lost, and this process was not just for the teller. The listeners, surrounded by the same evocative aroma, formed a powerful, multi-sensory bond. The story of the founding was no longer just a series of words. It was the smell of ancient trees and rich soil. The legend of the voyage became intertwined with the crisp scent of salt air. This fusion of narrative and fragrance created a memory that was far more durable and emotionally resonant than sound could ever be alone. It demonstrated a profound understanding of the human mind, showing how a carefully chosen scent could act as the strongest possible anchor, tethering a complex narrative firmly in place for a lifetime. This second method introduced a scent that could travel through time. perfumers developed an even more sophisticated technique, creating layered aromas that changed and evolved, mirroring the unfolding chapters of a historical timeline. A single scarf could be treated with a complex perfume designed to reveal its story in stages, just as history itself is not a single event but a sequence of eras. The base note, the foundation of the scent, might be a deep, earthy vetiver. This represented the ancient soil from which a culture first grew, the primal connection to the land that grounded everything to come. Layered on top of this foundation were the middle notes, often floral or spicy, like rose and clove. These scents emerged more slowly, symbolizing a period of flourishing trade, artistic achievement, or a long-lasting peace. Finally, the top notes were the most immediate, bright and sharp with citrus or the bite of pepper. These indicated recent history, a sudden conflict, a revolution, or a dramatic discovery that changed everything. The true genius of this method was in its activation. A scarf stored in a chest held its history dormant, but when it was worn, the warmth of the body would gently heat the fibers, causing the perfume to release its notes in a carefully orchestrated sequence. The history would literally unfold in the air around the wearer, a fragrant timeline made physical. A storyteller could use this as a powerful narrative device, holding the scarf to their nose and saying, "Notice how the deep earth fades, and now, as you smell the rose emerging, our people entered a golden age that lasted for 3 generations." The shifting scent became the story's soundtrack, a direct sensory link to the progression of time. This transformed the scarf from a static record into a dynamic, temporal map. The listener did not just hear about the transition from a dark age to a period of prosperity. They experienced it through a scent that transformed before their very senses, making the flow of history something you could breathe in and feel changing around you. It was a living chronicle, its pages turned not by hand but by the simple heat of a human life. While the scarf held its history in scent, the human voice carried its chronicles in song. Music and its underlying meter provided an unshakable structural foundation for memory. Rhythmic patterns and repetitive melodies are, in fact, some of the most powerful mnemonic tools our brains can use. The medieval bards and griots who specialized in history did not simply sing pretty tunes. They composed with a deliberate architectural design, where every musical element served a precise informational purpose. Imagine a specific, ascending sequence of notes that always and only introduced a legendary hero, signaling to the audience that a great deed was about to be recounted. A persistent, steady drumbeat could act as a rhythmic anchor, underlining a long list of ancestral names, making a potentially dry recitation into a compelling, unforgettable chant. And when the story turned to tragedy or a great defeat, the melody would shift into a slow, mournful refrain, its very tempo embedding the feeling of loss directly into the listener's heart. This musical framework was a sophisticated mental filing system. The tune became the drawer, and the lyrics were the documents placed neatly inside. A storyteller could access this system effortlessly. The opening bars of a particular melody would instantly call forth the entire chapter of history associated with it, ensuring that the story of a founding battle or a royal lineage was recalled with perfect accuracy, generation after generation. The song was more than a performance. It was a composed, living archive proving that history could be orchestrated, and the individuals who held the keys to this sonic library were far more than mere musicians. They were the revered and indispensable singers, the human vessels for these living, breathing histories. The weight of history rested not in a stone library, but in the trained memory of a single person. Across the courts and feasting halls of medieval Europe, a bard's education was a monumental undertaking, a mental discipline we would scarcely recognize today. A young apprentice in Wales did not simply learn songs. He was required to internalize 24 distinct poetic meters, each one a specific template designed for a different kind of record. One complex rhythm was reserved for tracing royal genealogies, ensuring the line of kings was recited without a single error. Another meter, with its own unique cadence, was the designated vessel for codifying land rights and ancient laws. This was not art for art's sake. It was an intricate information technology where the strict rules of verse acted as an error-checking system for the mind, locking facts into an unshakable sequence. The performance itself was a high-stakes event. In the fire-lit hall of a chieftain or king, the bard's song was the community looking into its own soul. As his fingers plucked the harp strings, the music did more than just accompany the words. A sudden, discordant chord might signal the arrival of a tragic betrayal in the story, while a swift, triumphant melody physically lifted the audience's spirits during a tale of victory. The history was felt in the body as much as it was understood by the brain. These men and women were the sanctioned historians, their very presence at a gathering a sign of its importance. They carried the entire cultural identity in their heads, a living, breathing archive whose voice could summon the ghosts of ancestors and the echoes of foundational oaths. To lose a bard was to lose a chapter of history itself, a vulnerability that would eventually inspire communities to find another, more durable vessel for their most vital records. The ballad was the era's great audio chronicle, a sprawling musical document that could stretch across an entire evening. These were not simple ditties but dense narrative epics, meticulously structured to preserve the facts of a coronation, a pivotal treaty, or a devastating famine. Their great power lay in a formulaic architecture designed for maximum recall. A repeating chorus hammered home the central theme of the event, acting as the story's unshakable spine. Individual verses would then advance the plot with new details, while specific musical phrases served as audible section breaks, signaling to the audience a shift to a new chapter, perhaps from the preparations for battle to the combat itself. This rigid framework transformed entertainment into a verifiable historical record. Consider the Song of Roland, a French epic that recounts the Battle of Roncesvalles pass with such precise detail about warriors, terrain, and actions that historians still study it as a vital source. In a society without widespread writing, how could a community ensure its history remained consistent over centuries? The ballad was the answer. The rhyme and rhythm made the facts sticky, locking names, dates, and deeds into a sequence that was almost impossible to forget or misquote. A singer could not easily alter the details of a land grant described in a specific verse because the established melody and rhyme scheme would reject the change. This allowed a community to maintain a complex, shared timeline, proving that a well-composed song could be as trustworthy a source as any written parchment, and far more alive in the telling. The fourth method turned history into a collective act of remembrance, a living echo that belonged to everyone. This was the call and response chronicle, a powerful musical structure where history was not just heard but actively answered. In West African traditions, the griot would stand before the community, his voice carrying the weight of generations. He would sing out a line, a single piece of the historical record. He might declare the name of a founding ancestor or describe a crucial moment from a great migration. Then, the entire assembled group would answer back with a fixed, rhythmic phrase, a powerful chorus that affirmed and validated the fact. This transformed the historical narrative from a solo performance into a communal ritual. The information was no longer passively received. Every person present had to actively participate, their voices joining together to sing the past back into existence. This constant, rhythmic repetition was a powerful mnemonic engine. By physically voicing the responses, the community was etching the history directly into their own memories, making each individual a living scroll. The method also acted as a brilliant real-time verification system. If the lead singer ever made a mistake, if he skipped a generation in a lineage or misstated a term of an ancient treaty, the community's unified response would falter. The rhythm would break. The error would be caught instantly by the collective memory of the crowd, ensuring the historical record remained pure and uncorrupted across the centuries. This practice guaranteed that history was never the sole property of a single storyteller. It was the shared responsibility and the common inheritance of the entire group, a truth held not in one mind but in the united voice of the people. The most powerful storytellers did not rely on just one sense. They wove scent and song into a single, unbreakable cord of memory. Imagine a performer untying a scarf that carried the dry, herbal fragrance of desert sage, a scent that spoke of vast, sun-baked plains and a long, arduous journey. As the cloth unfolded, releasing its aroma into the air, the storyteller would begin a slow, haunting melody about the Great Migration. The listeners were not just hearing a story. They were breathing it in. The music set the emotional stage, a soundtrack of longing and endurance, while the scent provided the physical landscape, the very air of the ancestral homeland. This created a synesthetic lock in the mind, a dual encoding that made the memory profoundly resilient. If years later, someone heard a fragment of that same migration song, the ghost of the sage scent would rise in their memory, pulling the entire story back with it. Conversely, catching that unique aroma in the wild would instantly bring the mournful melody to mind, complete with the images of a people walking under a boundless sky. This method acknowledged a simple, brilliant truth. Some people remember through sound, others through smell, and the most powerful memories are those that speak to both. It was a holistic approach to history, creating redundant pathways to the past. By engaging multiple senses at once, the storyteller built a memory so deep and interconnected that losing it became almost impossible. The history lived in the harmony between the nose and the ear, a durable record written into the very senses of the people. The scarf itself could speak through its silent, physical language. Beyond the layered perfumes, the very form of the textile was a coded script. The way it was tied, folded, or draped over the shoulders held specific, widely understood meanings. A complex knot secured at one end was not a way to keep the scarf from slipping. It was a public declaration, a silent announcement that a royal dynasty had reached its end, its line of succession severed. A scarf folded meticulously into a sharp triangle was not just a tidy bundle. It represented the sacred mountain at the center of the world, the place from which, according to their creation story, the first people emerged. This was a grammar of cloth and gesture, a visual shorthand that everyone in the community was taught to read from childhood. During a performance, the storyteller was a sculptor of fabric and narrative. As they spoke of a kingdom's golden age of peace and prosperity, their hands would gently unfold the scarf, letting it flow wide and open, a visual metaphor for expansion and abundance. But when the tale turned to a bitter civil war, those same hands would twist the linen tightly, wringing it into a tense, coiled rope, physically manifesting the conflict and strain. This kinetic element transformed the recitation into a true performance art. The audience did not merely listen. They watched the scarf's journey, understanding that its changing shape was a direct parallel to the unfolding drama. The story lived in the movement, in the transformation of a simple piece of cloth into a map of territories gained, a symbol of unity frayed, or a monument to a fallen hero. It was history told not just to the ear but to the eye, a silent dance that gave weight and form to the words being sung. The fifth method turned genealogy into a landscape you could touch and smell. A large, intricately woven scarf became a scented map of an entire family's history, a tactile and aromatic chart of lineage. Imagine a vast textile laid out before a storyteller, its center imbued with the rich, enduring scent of sandalwood. This central point represented the founding patriarch, the root from which the entire family tree grew. Radiating out from this core were distinct branches, each one infused with its own unique perfume. One branch might carry the sweet, floral scent of jasmine, representing a lineage known for its artists and poets. Another path could be marked by the sharp, clean aroma of cedarwood, symbolizing a line of warriors or skilled woodworkers. As the historian recited the family's chronicle, they did not work from a written list. Their finger would trace the physical paths on the fabric, following the trail of jasmine. With each inch of scented cloth, they would recite the names, the great deeds, and the strategic marriages that defined that specific branch. This was a multi-sensory navigation of ancestry. The method transformed an abstract list of names into a concrete, spatial experience. You could see the divergence of family lines. You could smell the unique character of each branch. A complex web of relationships that would be confusing on parchment became an intuitive journey across a scented terrain. It demonstrated a breathtaking fusion of cartography and aromatics, proving that to understand where you came from, sometimes you needed a map that spoke directly to your senses of touch and smell. The journey of a memory began long before it was ever woven into a song or a scent. Every ingredient used in these practices arrived steeped in its own epic tale. A scarf infused with frankincense did more than just smell sacred. It was a physical echo of the incense road, a tangible link to the bustling caravans and desert markets of the Arab world. Its presence in a European court chronicle, released with every unfold of the cloth, whispered of vast trade networks and distant, sun-scorched lands. In the same way, the rare and mysterious ambergris, a waxy substance from the sea, carried the scent of danger and discovery. Its very aroma was the story of whaling voyages and treacherous ocean crossings, a narrative of risk and reward pulled from the deep. The materials themselves were never blank slates. They were artifacts, each one a compacted history of geography and human endeavor. This deep connection extended to the very tools of sound. The construction of a bard's harp was often a subject for song itself. A ballad might detail the specific oak tree from which the soundbox was carved, a tree that grew in a sacred grove where kings were crowned. The song would honor the craftsman who shaped the wood and the sheep that provided the gut for the strings, linking the instrument's pure tone directly back to the land and the community that created it. The medium was never separate from the message. The origin of the material added a foundational layer of truth, rooting the abstract story in the physical world. When a griot sang a history while plucking the strings of a kora, he was not just playing an instrument, he was activating an object whose own creation was part of the legacy he was recounting. The sound that filled the air was the voice of the forest, the herd, and the artisan, all woven into the melody. This created a profound chain of custody, from the source of the material to the performance of the memory, ensuring that every element of the story, down to the very smell and the sound, was authentic and deeply meaningful. The sixth method tied history to the heartbeat of the community, the sacred rhythm of its ceremonies. A special scarf was not for daily wear. It was a ritual object stored in a carved wooden box or a woven basket, waiting for the one day each year it was needed. This reserved textile was the centerpiece of coronations, harvest festivals, and coming-of-age rites. Its power was concentrated through its confinement. When the elder or priest finally unfurled it before the assembled people, the scarf released a potent, stored burst of scent. an aromatic fanfare that immediately signaled this was no ordinary moment. That singular, complex fragrance acted as a temporal anchor, linking the present ceremony directly to every single one that had come before it. The smell was the constant, the unbroken thread through time. The song performed at this event was equally fixed, a ritual text that could not be altered. It was often the origin story of the ceremony itself. At a harvest festival, the unfurled scarf might release the warm, comforting aroma of baked earth, ripe wheat, and sweet honey. As that familiar scent filled the air, the community would join together to sing the song of the first planting, a hymn that recounted how their ancestors first learned to cultivate the land and ended their hunger. This was not just a performance, it was a reenactment, a sensory reliving of their foundational myth. The scent triggered the memory, the song structured the narrative, and the ritual action of unfurling physically embodied the act of remembering. This powerful combination ensured the history was not only recalled accurately but also felt deeply, year after year, binding the community's identity to the turning of the seasons and the cycles of human life. The past was not a distant story, it was an annual guest invited back by a familiar fragrance and a sacred song. This sensory knowledge was never written in a manual. It lived and breathed in the master and apprentice relationship, a chain of memory stretching unbroken across the centuries. The training of a new historian was a total immersion in the language of scent and sound. An aspirant, often chosen in childhood for their keen memory or sensitive nose, would enter a world where every aroma was a paragraph and every melody a chapter. Their education was a slow, meticulous cultivation of perception. They did not merely memorize the song of the Great Flood. They learned to associate its specific, mournful melody with the sharp, petrichor scent of rain on dry earth that was infused into its corresponding scarf. Their master would present them with a blindfold test, holding up a swatch of cloth imbued with a single, complex fragrance. From that one scent, the apprentice had to recall not just the name of the story, but the key figures involved, the location of the event, and its ultimate consequence for the community. It was a brutal but effective form of recall. The information had to be so deeply embedded that a single sensory key could unlock the entire narrative vault. They learned the delicate art of perfume alchemy, grinding resins and steeping petals, understanding how heat and time would alter a scent's character on the fabric. They practiced the graceful, coded gestures of the scarf, learning that a flick of the wrist could signify a sudden betrayal, while a slow, unfolding drape represented a period of peace and expansion. This was not just rote learning, it was the forging of a new living repository, a person who did not just know the stories but who had fully internalized the sensory world those stories inhabited. The master's final test was often the most daunting. They would play 3 notes from a forgotten melody and demand the entire genealogy it was meant to protect. Or they would present a scarf folded in the ancient way of mourning and ask for the story of the lost battle it commemorated. Success meant the apprentice had become a true link in the chain, a guardian ready to carry the weight of the past in their voice and in their senses. A traveling historian carried their entire archive in a single, carefully packed chest. This was no mere luggage but a portable memory palace containing the distilled essence of multiple communities. Inside, rolled in soft linen to protect their precious aromas, were scarves dedicated to specific clans, regions, and historical eras. One cloth might hold the coastal scent of salt and seaweed for the fishing villages, while another was imbued with the mountain aroma of pine and cold stone for the highland clans. Alongside these textiles rested a small apothecary's case of essential oils, tiny vials of concentrated history used to refresh the fading scents on the road, ensuring every narrative remained vivid. And always within easy reach was their musical instrument, the voice through which these scented stories would find their words and rhythm. Upon entering a new village or a foreign court, the historian's first task was one of recognition and respect. They would not launch into a generic tale. Instead, they would open their chest and carefully select the one scarf whose story belonged to this particular audience. As they unfurled the cloth, the release of a familiar, ancestral fragrance would ripple through the crowd. That first, unexpected scent of heather and peat smoke for a people from the moors was an immediate and powerful authentication. It was a non-verbal declaration that said, "I know who you are. I carry your past with me." This shared sensory experience built an instant bridge of trust, transforming the performer from a wandering stranger into a welcomed keeper of their own identity. This portability was the lifeblood of a widespread cultural network. These historians were the living conduits connecting geographically separated groups who shared a common language and heritage. A historian traveling from the eastern valleys to the western shores did more than just recite stories. They exchanged updates. After performing the established history of the Western clan, woven into a scarf scented with coastal herbs, they would then listen. They would learn of a recent battle, a new trade agreement, or the birth of a prophesied child. These new events would be mentally filed away, assigned a symbolic scent note, perhaps the sharpness of forged metal or the sweetness of a newborn's swaddling herbs. On their return journey, they would incorporate this new chapter into the Eastern clan's narrative, refreshing their scarf with an updated perfume that now included the story from the coast. In this way, the historian's toolkit became a dynamic, updating database, a networking system for collective memory that ensured isolated communities remained threads in a larger, living tapestry of shared history. Yet the very portability of these traditions could not shield them from a far more powerful tide of change. The arrival of the printing press in Europe did more than just produce books. It began to fundamentally rewire society's concept of truth and memory. A written document, once set in ink, offered the illusion of permanence. It could be locked away, copied identically, and presented as an unchanging artifact. This new form of authority was starkly different from the living, breathing history carried by a storyteller. The scent-infused scarf, with its notes that subtly changed over the years, suddenly seemed fleeting and subjective. The epic ballad, which might vary slightly in its performance from one village to the next, was now viewed with suspicion, as if its fluidity were a flaw rather than a feature of a living tradition. The objective, silent word on the page began to eclipse the multisensory, emotionally charged memory. A community's trust, once placed in the trained senses of their elder, slowly transferred to the printed ledger. The master perfumer, who once collaborated with historians to encode chronicles in fragrance, found their art dismissed as mere superstition or simple perfumery. Their intricate recipes for memory, painstakingly developed over generations, were no longer seen as essential technology. They became curiosities, the stuff of old wives' tales, as the culture's definition of what counted as real history narrowed to only what could be seen with the eyes. This shift in perception had a devastating effect on the practice itself. As the demand for these complex sensory chronicles waned, the incentive to train new apprentices evaporated. Why spend a decade learning to associate 300 distinct scents with specific genealogical branches when a family tree could be neatly drawn on parchment? The songs suffered a similar fate. The grand, detail-rich ballads that once filled an entire evening were often shortened into simpler folk tunes. They kept their melodic beauty but shed their dense historical content. The lists of names, the terms of treaties, the descriptions of land boundaries, all the vital data that once gave the song its weight and purpose. The scarves themselves underwent a quiet transformation. Losing their role as revered archives, they were washed of their unique perfumes. The intricate folding techniques and symbolic knots were forgotten, their meanings fading away with the last generation that understood their silent language. A textile that once held the entire story of a migration became just a piece of cloth, a simple accessory to keep out the cold. This was more than just the loss of a few techniques. It marked a profound turning point in the human relationship with the past. History was pulled from the air, from the music, from the very senses, and flattened onto the page. The past became something to be read about rather than something to be experienced. The rich, holistic understanding of memory, one that engaged smell, sound, and touch, was traded for the stark clarity of the visual. And in that trade, we gained a certain kind of efficiency, but we may have lost a deeper, more visceral connection to the lives that came before our own. Grief itself became a form of record-keeping. The eighth method transformed profound loss into a living, breathing memorial through the power of the lament. These were not ordinary songs. A historical lament was a meticulously composed chronicle of a community's deepest trauma, a musical vessel for a painful memory like a devastating famine or a decisive, crushing defeat in battle. Its purpose was not to entertain, but to carve a scar of remembrance into the very soul of the people. The performance was a ritual of collective mourning, and at its center was a special scarf, one never worn for celebration. This textile was infused with scents that spoke directly to the heart of sorrow. The crisp, clean aroma of cypress, the tree of cemeteries, or the deep, sacred scent of myrrh used in burial rites would saturate the cloth. When the storyteller, often an elder who had lived through the event, held this scarf during the lament, its fragrance began to seep into the air, setting a somber, sacred stage. The music itself was engineered for memory and emotion. The melody moved at a slow, processional pace, its haunting intervals and repetitive, descending phrases mimicking the feeling of a heavy heart. The lyrics did not shy away from the brutal details. They named the fallen leaders, described the barren fields, recounted the moment the city walls were breached. As the singer's voice rose and fell with the weight of the story, the scent of myrrh and cypress wrapped around the audience, merging the sound of grief with the smell of loss. This multi-sensory assault was not meant to cause despair. It was designed for catharsis. By collectively breathing in the funerary scent while singing of their shared tragedy, the community underwent a powerful emotional release. They were not just hearing about a past disaster. They were reliving it together in a safe, structured way, allowing the pain to be fully felt and then, finally, released. This process ensured that the most painful chapters of their history were not buried or forgotten out of shame. The lament forced a community to stare directly into its own wounds year after year. It served as a stark, emotional warning. The memory of that specific defeat, triggered by the unique melody and its accompanying scent, became a powerful deterrent against repeating the same political mistakes or military blunders. But more importantly, it stood as a testament to human resilience. The very act of singing the lament, of surviving to tell the tale, proved that they had endured the unimaginable and were still here. This method held a radical idea. It taught that true history is not a curated gallery of triumphs. It is a full spectrum of human experience where grief holds as much weight as glory. By formally remembering their pain, the community integrated it into their identity, using the act of remembrance as the essential first step toward genuine healing and long-term growth. The lament was the proof that a society could only move forward by first giving a proper sensory burial to its ghosts. The ancient art of sensory history is no longer a forgotten relic. A new wave of researchers is now piecing together these lost practices, a field emerging as sensory archaeology. They are the detectives of the intangible, scouring medieval manuscripts not for dates and battles, but for fleeting descriptions of a specific floral perfume used in a coronation or the exact rhythm of a ballad that once encoded a legal code. Their work is a meticulous reconstruction, an attempt to hear and smell the past back into existence. In laboratories, fascinating experiments are underway. Volunteers are given complex stories to memorize, each one paired with a unique, custom-blended scent. Days or weeks later, when exposed to that specific fragrance, their recall of the narrative is tested. The results are beginning to validate what medieval societies knew instinctively. The scent acts as a powerful key, unlocking details and emotional context with a clarity that visual cues alone cannot match. This scientific inquiry confirms the profound wisdom embedded in these old ways. But this revival is not confined to academic journals. Museums and cultural centers are eagerly embracing these findings to transform how we encounter history. Imagine walking into an exhibit about the Silk Road and being greeted not by a silent map, but by the subtle, evolving aroma of dust, leather, and exotic spices. Or attending a performance of a medieval epic where the storyteller uses a replica scented scarf, allowing the audience to breathe in the same narrative triggers as the original listeners. This is history you do not just see, you feel it in the air around you. It becomes an immersive, emotional journey. This movement challenges a fundamental assumption. For centuries, we have treated the written word as the sole vessel of truth, but this reliance has flattened our understanding. We gained a timeline of events but lost the texture of the experience. Sensory archaeology offers a correction. It suggests that to truly know the past, we must engage with it through the same channels the people of the time did. We must be willing to listen to its songs and breathe in its stories, recovering the full, rich, and deeply human dimensions of history that ink alone could never capture. The law itself could be hummed. In societies without written legal codes for every citizen, the most vital rules for communal life were preserved not on parchment but in melody. This ninth method transformed complex legal statutes and binding communal decrees into simple, hypnotic songs. A dense list of property rights or the specific penalties for a crime were not recited in a monotone. They were set to a repetitive, easily memorized tune, a mnemonic melody designed to stick in the mind of every single person, from the farmer in the field to the merchant in the marketplace. The performance of these law songs was a formal public event, and it was accompanied by a distinct sensory cue. The designated legal historian would hold a scarf imbued with a formal, austere scent, something like the deep, earthy smell of vetiver or the sharp, authoritative aroma of aged leather. As that serious fragrance drifted through the crowd, it signaled that what they were about to hear was not a story of adventure, but the official and binding framework of their society. The combination was powerful. The repetitive melody made the law unforgettable, while the sober scent framed it with an air of gravitas and permanence. This system ensured true public knowledge of the law. A villager involved in a border dispute would find the specific verse about landmarkers echoing in their memory. A craftsman negotiating a contract would recall the tune detailing the terms of a fair exchange. The law was not a secret text locked away for the elite. It was a shared auditory possession, a tune that could pop into anyone's head the moment a relevant situation in daily life arose. This application of sensory memory to the most pragmatic aspects of governance proves its utility was immense. These were not just techniques for preserving epic poems. They were the very operating system for justice and social order, ensuring that the rules everyone lived by were as accessible as a song on the lips and as immediate as a familiar scent on the air. The secret to the scarf's power lies deep within the human brain. Modern neuroscience now confirms what medieval storytellers knew through centuries of careful observation. Your sense of smell is wired directly into your most ancient memory centers. The olfactory bulb, the part of your brain that identifies scents, has a direct hotline to two crucial regions, the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala is the seat of raw emotion, while the hippocampus is the librarian of long-term memory. This is why a forgotten aroma from your childhood, the scent of your grandmother's kitchen or a specific summer rain, can suddenly ambush you with a wave of feeling and a flood of vivid images. A picture or a sound simply does not have this same direct, unedited pathway. Medieval practitioners were in effect cognitive engineers. When they paired the epic of a great migration with the scent of desert sage, they were not just making the story pleasant. They were performing a kind of mental alchemy. They were fusing the factual narrative directly to the emotional and memory cores of the brain. This process created a memory that was exceptionally durable, one that was far more resistant to the fading and distortion that plagues ordinary recollection. The story, now anchored by a unique scent, became a part of the listener's very neural architecture. This was not a mystical ritual. It was a brilliant, intuitive application of a fundamental biological principle. They discovered how to hardwire history into the mind itself, creating records that were not just remembered but viscerally relived, generation after generation. The final method wove the human timeline directly into the turning of the earth. Certain cultures created a calendar of cloth and melody, a rotating cycle of scarves and songs that changed with the seasons. This was history in rhythm with the world itself. The spring scarf was a celebration of new life, its fibers imbued with the bright, hopeful aromas of crocus, damp soil, and budding leaves. When unfurled, this fresh fragrance would fill the air as the community sang their creation myths and tales of first beginnings, the very scent of Genesis reinforcing the stories of origin. As the sun grew stronger, the spring textile was stored away and the summer scarf was brought out. This one carried the hot, solar scents of sun-baked thyme, dry grass, and rosemary. Its assertive, herbal character was the perfect companion for epic songs of expansion, of great conflicts fought under a blazing sun, and of empires reaching their peak power. The stories of summer were about raw energy and ambition, mirrored in the vibrant, pungent smells of a world in full, fierce bloom. When the air grew crisp, the autumn scarf took its place. This textile held the comforting, melancholy aromas of hay, ripe apples, and distant wood smoke. Its scent was the essence of completion and consequence. The songs now shifted to histories of the harvest, of storing provisions, and of reaping what had been sown, both in the fields and in human endeavors. It was a time for tales that weighed the results of summer's ambitions, framing history as a natural process of gain and loss. Finally, with the first snows, the winter scarf emerged. This cloth was reserved for the most profound stories, carrying the sharp, clean scents of pine needles, cinnamon, and cold, still air. In the long, dark nights, huddled around fires, the community would listen to songs of endurance, of ancestors who survived famine and ice, and of deep introspection. The winter history was not about external events, but about the inner strength required to persist. This rotating chronicle did more than just organize stories. It created a profound, unbreakable bond between the people and their environment. Human history was no longer a separate thread. It was part of the same tapestry that included the migration of birds and the cycle of crops. To know the season was to know the kind of story you would hear and smell, making the past a living, breathing, and ever-turning part of the present world. These inkless histories were not a European secret, but a global human instinct, Far from the courts of medieval bards, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia were charting their entire world through songlines. These were not simple melodies but epic, rhythmic narratives that described the landscape in meticulous detail. A specific sequence of notes and words would map the location of a waterhole, the shape of a mountain range, or the path of a creator ancestor across the sky. To travel across vast, featureless deserts, a person would sing the song of the land, using the melody as an auditory map that connected them physically and spiritually to the history embedded in the terrain. The song was the territory, a sung geography that preserved thousands of years of environmental and cultural knowledge without a single written word. Across the sea in Japan, an equally refined tradition elevated scent to a high art. The kodo, or way of incense, was a ceremonial practice where participants would identify and appreciate subtle, complex aromas. But this was far more than a guessing game. The scents were carefully composed to evoke specific scenes from classical literature, historical episodes, or poetic verses like those from the tale of Genji. Inhaling a particular blend of aloeswood and spices was not just smelling a perfume. It was an invitation to recall a moonlit night from a 10th century story, or the melancholic beauty of autumn in the imperial court. The scent became a gateway to a shared cultural memory, a way to experience the emotional landscape of the past directly through the senses. Meanwhile, in the Americas, the Maya were using the sacred smoke of copal resin to bridge the gap between the present and the historical realm. During rituals, the rising, fragrant clouds of this aromatic incense were believed to carry prayers and invocations to the ancestors, but the narratives invoked were not merely spiritual. The ceremonies recounted the deeds of historical kings, the founding of cities, and the mythological origins of the people themselves. The distinct, sharp, and cleansing scent of burning copal was the sensory backdrop for these recitations, inextricably linking the smell to the story of cosmic and human order. When we place these traditions side by side, a profound pattern emerges. From the sung maps of Australia to the scented poetry of Japan and the incensed histories of the Maya, we see a universal human drive to weave identity and memory into a multisensory experience. The modern idea that history is a purely visual, written record is the anomaly. For most of human existence, the past was a living reality you could hear, smell, and feel, a deeply personal connection that flowed through the very air we breathe. This control over the past was a subtle but immense form of power. The elder who alone knew the secret for blending the coronation scent, or the bard who held the only complete version of the founding epic, wielded an authority that was almost invisible yet absolute. They were the gatekeepers of identity, deciding which stories were remembered with vivid, scented clarity and which were allowed to fade into silence. This concentration of knowledge could be a force for remarkable stability. A unified narrative reinforced by a shared song and a common fragrance could bind a community together, giving everyone a single, powerful origin story and a clear sense of purpose. But this same system was vulnerable to corruption. Its integrity rested entirely on the character of the keeper. A ruler with something to hide could easily pressure a court historian to alter a recipe. A single, strategic change to a commemorative perfume could be enough. By removing the note of clove that symbolized a rival clan's contribution to a great victory, and replacing it with a new, dominant note of cedar representing the king's own lineage, the entire historical event could be subtly rewritten for future generations. The song could be recomposed, its verses shortened to omit an embarrassing defeat or a previous ruler's folly. The past became malleable in the hands of the few who understood its sensory code. This presents a profound ethical puzzle. We often think of written history as being more democratic, simply because books can be copied and spread. but a written chronicle can also be burned, edited, or locked away by those in power. Both systems, the sensory and the written, are ultimately human creations, and both are susceptible to the biases and ambitions of their creators. The scent and the song were not inherently more truthful than the parchment. They were simply a different kind of vessel, carrying the same timeless struggle over who gets to tell the story and for what purpose. The ghost of these methods lingers in our very speech. We still speak of a scent that brings the past flooding back, or a tune that tells a story, without realizing these phrases are linguistic fossils from a time when such things were literal truth. Our fairy tales are filled with enchanted textiles, from cloaks of invisibility to scarves that grant wisdom, echoing the real power once vested in woven narratives. Even the structure of a classic folktale, with its rhythmic repetitions and formulaic phrases, mirrors the mnemonic architecture of the medieval ballad, designed for easy recall around a hearth. When a modern filmmaker scores a historical epic with a powerful, recurring theme, they are tapping into the same ancient principle as the bard who used a specific melody to encode a legal code. That musical motif is a distant cousin of the mnemonic ballad, an auditory shortcut that helps us feel the weight of history. These are not random cultural artifacts. They are the sublimated remnants of a whole way of knowing, a sensory system of memory that was folded into the fabric of our stories when it was no longer needed for survival. The practices of perfumed scarves and epic songs did not die out completely. They went underground, becoming the subconscious foundation of how we instinctively link memory to identity and narrative. We still understand on some deep level that a smell can be a time machine and a melody can be a map. We have simply forgotten why we know it. Our journey through these inkless histories reveals a system of profound sophistication, where the past was not merely recalled but viscerally relived. The methods of perfumed scarves and epic song were not primitive precursors to writing. They were brilliant technologies exquisitely adapted to the human brain's innate strengths for sensory and emotional memory. We have learned that history is far more than a collection of facts on a page. It is a lived experience, a story that engages our whole being, from the primal recognition of a scent to the rhythmic pull of a melody. In rediscovering these techniques, we gain more than just a deeper appreciation for medieval ingenuity. We uncover a set of powerful tools for our own time. They remind us to make our own stories immersive, to engage all the senses in the act of remembrance, and to understand that the most enduring memories are not the ones we simply know, but the ones that make us feel. Let this exploration inspire you to think differently about how we preserve what matters. What stories from your own life could be woven not just into words, but into a scent, a song, or a texture, creating a memory so deeply felt it could never truly be lost?